Hello and welcome to another episode of Craftube. I'm Ros Clark, this is Ros Clark Craft. If you've not already subscribed to my channel, you can do that right now. And if you'd like to be informed every time I upload a new video, do remember to click the notification bell as well. If you enjoy what you're watching, be sure to share it with your friends on social media and come back next time. So this week, this is my regular fortnightly catch-up of what I've been doing. We'll have a look at something off the wall. I've got a little bit of sewing to show you. I'm going to talk a bit more about the knitting project that I'm doing. Someone asked a couple of questions about that, so I thought I'd try and explain it a bit more. I've got some stitching and the results of the which fake fur fabric should Ros buy and make a coat out of. A couple of things from art class and one or two purchases to share with you. So I'm going to start with my off the wall item. Now you won't have seen this. It doesn't live here, it lives on a different wall in my house. But I thought I would show you this one because it relates to the little history of sewing threads that I did. If you've been watching my studio tour and tidy up, you'll have seen me talk a bit about old sewing threads. If you've not watched that, I'll put a link. If you couldn't get through the wobbly camera work at the beginning of that video, I'll put in a link to the right timestamp because when I'm talking about sewing threads, there's a much more stable camera and it's much easier to follow. But I said in that there were not any wooden cotton reels in that, the much older ones. And that's because I used all the wooden cotton reels I could find to make this. So you may be wondering what this is. Is it just a not all that decorative way of hanging up and displaying old cotton reels? Well, no. I mean, it is that, and I do like it, and I'll talk to you about how I made it, but it does have a particular purpose, and it's this. If you knit with circular knitting needles, this is a circular knitting needle, which is not really a circle, it's for knitting in circles. You get two tips, one of mine is a bit bent, at the end, which is where you would do your normal knitting. Let's hold that up so you can see. At this end, they just look like normal knitting needles. But instead of being separate and having a fixed end, they're joined with this cable. You can use circular knitting needles in two different ways. Well, multiple different ways, but two main ways. You can knit around and around and around. So as you knit from your left needle to your right needle, the stitches slip over, and as you keep knitting around the row, they get moved along and along and along until they come back to this end. And you just keep going. Now that's how you would use a circular knitting needle for knitting effectively a tube. So something like socks, or even the body of a jumper or a hat, anything where you think, actually, I just want a tube. So rather than knitting it in flat pieces and sewing them together, it would be easier if I just knitted around and around and around. You can, however, also use your circular knitting needle for knitting flat. So you would just use it effectively as if it's a longer flat needle. And it holds your stitches really nicely. You can get ones with different length cables, so some can be really long if you're knitting a really wide piece, or you can get much shorter ones if you're only knitting a short piece. And you just use your needles as normal, and when you get to the end, you turn around like you would with flat needles and knit back the other way. And it's a nice thing if you're knitting large items, which can get quite heavy and quite bulky. And the circular knitting needle, the cable just lets it sort of sit, and it can sit on your lap, and yeah, it's just easier often to manipulate. But the problem with circular knitting needles is how do you store them? You can't store them very easily in a normal knitting needle holder where you would sort of put them in an end and then roll it around because the cable gets in the way. So there are things on the market that you can buy. There are things that are a bit like CD cases, remember old CD cases with sort of wallets, and you'd slip each one in and you can fit it in. But this is my solution. I've not seen this on the market, but maybe people make something like this, because you can slip your knitting needle through the cotton reel, hangs down on either side, I have this hanging on the wall, stores all my circular knitting needles. I think it looks fine. You know, in a craft room space, it looks quite fine. And it's easy to find them. I haven't done this, but you could, if you wanted, label each of these reels with the size of knitting needle you're putting in each one. And then it makes it very easy to find the ones that you want. There is one limitation. Obviously, you can only fit in needles that fit through the whole of the cotton reel. And I do have one or two that are much wider. I think I have a 9mm needle and maybe a 6 or 7mm needle, something like that, and they don't fit through. So I do have to store those separately. But for almost all the ones I use, these fit in absolutely fine. So I made this. All I did was I got my old cotton reels, and I had a set. I mean, this is years old now, so it is slightly falling apart. I had a set of mini skeins of yarn dyed in this beautiful gradient, pinky purpley colourway. And so all I did was I wrapped the yarn around and glued it down to make this sort of pattern going down the thing. You could wrap them all in the same yarn. You could wrap them in paper. If they've got actual cotton thread still on there, you could use that. You could paint them. You could decorate them any way you want. And you don't have to use lovely wooden cotton reels. I just used them because I had some. But you could do it perfectly well with standard modern plastic cotton reels. And then all I've done is I've taken the same yarn. Probably I would have been better using a nylon thread or something like that wasn't going to stretch. You can see these don't fit completely together, and that's because the yarn has stretched under the weight of it. But all I did was take the yarn in one side, out, and then back the other way and back all the way down to the bottom. Did that with 2 strands, so then the other one kind of alternates. You can see the sort of light colour and then the dark colour all the way through, tightened them up, made a little loop with a knot at the top. Job's a good one. So really easy. You could make it, if you only have a few, you only have to put a few cotton reels together. If you've got loads, you could make more than one, or you could have a really long hanger. Like I say, it doesn't work if you've got a lot of very large size needles. But most people I know who use circular needles, like I've certainly got 4, 4.5, 5mm needles in here without any problem. So that's that. And then just to follow on from the sort of history of thread series, you can see most of these are what we've seen before, the Dewhurst's Silco 3 shells, machine twist in a 40 weight. So there's a lot of them that are that label that you'll recognise if you've watched the other video. There are 1 or 2 that are different. This one is a Coates cord, and you see that Coates had that sort of chain logo, and I assume that cord, yeah, you can see on the other side, says it was 92 weight. No, 100 yards, 92 metres. Okay, 40 weight. So I don't know what that cord was, in fact. This one, I don't know what brand this is. It just says turquoise, but there's no label on the other side. Yes, I mean, this looks like a very old label, Dewhurst's there. And in fact, looking on the back of that, it is silk substitute, that thread was. So presumably some kind of polyester or nylon, something like that. But I just think they're lovely. And it's a shame to just throw them away. Look at this one. I don't know if you can read that, 'cause it's quite difficult to see. The colour's not very contrasty, but it says Luster machine twist. What else does that say? Just got the length on it, I think. Doesn't have a brand. But I just think they're lovely items, and it's lovely to find a use for them. And it feels like it's a really useful thing to do for a thing that otherwise can be quite difficult. Normally this has lots and lots hanging from it. I took them out partly because they need organising, and partly so that I could actually use this to show you what they are. I glued together the cotton reels, but hot glue doesn't last. But it's fine. It does the job still. So that is off the wall, and it seems sensible at this point to keep talking about knitting. So this is my knitting project. I'd started this last time, but I think I'd only just started it, and you can see this is knitted. In fact, this is a good example to show you what I was just talking about. I am using circular needles, so this is the tip of the needle at one end and this is the tip at the other end, and they're joined by this cable, but I am knitting a flat piece. So this is the end, and all I do is I knit to the end, turn it around, knit back, like you would if you were just using straight needles. But it's a lot of stitches, it sits really nicely on the cable. When I put it away, I'm not worrying about stitches coming off the end, and there's plenty of room for all the stitches that I need. Now, somebody was asking about why I had used this provisional cast on. There are a couple of reasons why you might use a provisional cast on. Yeah, a couple of reasons really. The most, well, I don't know if the most common, one of them, two reasons. The first reason is if you were likely to want to go back and knit in the other direction. So when I take this waste yarn out, you can see that red and brown waste yarn. When I take that out, I'll have a row of stitches that I can put on a needle, and then I can knit in this direction. Now, you might say, well, why wouldn't you just start at the end and knit there? Let me explain, try and explain how this bit of knitting relates to the cardigan it's going to become, because it is quite an unusual construction. It's not quite what I thought it was until I started knitting it, and I was like, oh, that's what we're doing. Where I have cast on is going to be, there we go, joined together like this, and find the ends. It's going to be the side seam. So that is going to be the side seam from bottom up to about there, and then this bit at the top is going to be the armhole. So having done a provisional cast on, what that means is the stitches at the top around the armhole, I can pick those up and then start knitting the sleeve without there needing to be any seam from here. So this will be the shoulder at the top where my hand is. This will be the armhole, and then I'll knit the sleeve out here. And then the rest of this, and this is the other reason you use a provisional cast on, I can graft together. And grafting means rather than casting off the knitting and then sewing it together, it's a way of knitting two sets of live stitches together so that it forms a single piece of fabric. And the most common way of grafting is what's known as Kitchener stitch. That is Lord Kitchener of Your Country Needs You fame. If you ever studied World War I at school, you may well have come across Lord Kitchener. And he is said to have not invented the stitch, but is said to have ordered that all socks that were being knitted for the troops in World War I should have grafted stitches at the toe instead of seamed stitches at the toe. Because if you graft the stitches together, you don't get any extra ridging or kind of bumping that you might get from a seam, which was causing the troops to get blisters and trench foot and making things much worse. You just get a smooth piece of fabric. You cannot tell that there has been a join there. It looks as if it's all knitted in one piece. And so Kitchener stitch is named after Lord Kitchener, and it gives you then a very nice smooth finish instead of a seam. So how is this cardigan going to work? It is, like I say, like I've never knitted a cardigan that works quite like this before. So this is going to be the side seam, as I say, where I've cast on. And then I'm going to knit until I have finished far enough across to be the front edge of the cardigan. There aren't actually buttons on this, but it's where your button band would be. At that point, I'll cast off. I think you cast off. I don't think you join them live. I can't remember. But anyway, I'll stop knitting on the front stitches. I'll do a little bit of shaping for a neckline, and I'll carry on knitting at the back because it's got a wider back with a sort of swingy pleat in it. I'll do all of that. Then I think you hold the stitches live and do the same for the other side of the cardigan. So again, you cast on at the side seam with your provisional cast on, you knit across until you've got to the centre front, you do a bit of shaping and knit till you're at the centre back, and then you graft together the stitches at the centre back. So again, it looks like there's no seam where there is a seam. It is quite complicated. I'll try and show you as I go along. And like I say, I will have put the schematic up there, and hopefully that's helped to make it a little bit clearer what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. I'm really enjoying the knitting. It is quite straightforward, although I have found I need to pay a little bit more attention to the pattern than I hoped, because some of the rows are quite similar but not the same. But I'm enjoying it. So it's going to go this way, and the sort of ripple will go like that on the fabric. I think it'll be really pretty when it's done. So that's my knitting. I've made some progress on that. Quite pleased with that. Let's talk about sewing. Now, I have not made any garments since I last chatted to you, but I have done a little bit of sewing, some of it more successful than others. This is from a piece of fabric that a friend gave me when she was moving house. It used to be a table runner. It's a bit, it's been in the sunlight, and you can see where bits of it have faded and bits of it haven't. So it's not great for making anything that you want to be really smart and special. But I really like the design of it. Can you see that? That sort of batik with the swirls and shapes on it in the purple against the sort of faded indigo background. And so what I have used to make this, I've got loads of this fabric, I've made bags and things from it, but what I've used to make from this is a paintbrush roll. So I cut a piece on the diagonal so I could fit large paintbrushes at one end and little small spatulas at the other, measured out where I wanted all my holders to be, and then I've sewn a piece on the top, so it's got this extra kind of cover, which I just feel is going to give it a little bit more protection. It's going to make it less likely for brushes to slip out when it's rolled up, but also just give them a bit more protection when it's inside the thing. Obviously you can flip this up so you can see what's there and access it all. I'm going on a painting holiday next week. This time next week I will be there, and so I just thought, well, I'll try and make it before I go so that I can use it while I'm there. So I'm pleased with that, and it just rolls up, and then I have got ties on the end, which, to be honest, you can just wrap around as plenty, but you could tie them up if you wanted to. So that's Paintbrush Roll. I didn't really use a pattern for it. I've made quite a lot of similar things to this before. I've made knitting needle holders and pencil rolls and so on, and they're all the same basic principle. You just want to measure how big the things are that you're going to put in there. And so for this one I knew I was going to want space for quite large paintbrushes. This is lovely. This is a size 1 inch, 1 stroke, but you can see it's quite big and chunky, so that needs a different size pocket from the ones I've got at the other end. Yeah, some of these little tiny things here. So I'm pleased with that. And the other thing which I sewed, I'm slightly less pleased with. So it's this. It's a pencil case. You may remember last time I showed you some of the Jules fabric that I found in Hobbycraft, and I thought that would be ideal for this, the fat quarters. I did use a tutorial for this, but I sort of took notes and then didn't completely follow it, and that's why it doesn't really work. So it's supposed to be, it's got this nice zip at the top, which I now can't even shut because it's not really made, but it does zip up. And then what's supposed to happen is that you can pull this top bit down. There's little tabs here, and you can pull it down, and then it becomes a stand-up pencil case. Now the problem with mine is I followed all the instructions, cut the sizes of the pieces, but what I entirely forgot was that in the tutorial the lady sewed these seams on the inside part. Let me show you. This, you do this inside part first. She sewed her seams so that they went in at the bottom. So these were on an angle, and I've sewed mine straight. And what that has meant is that this top part doesn't really fit over the bottom part. So I think I like it. So I think what I might do is see if I can go back and just fix these side seams so that they do angle in, and then hopefully the top portion will be able to be pulled down so that you can open it up and have it as a standing. I like the idea of this kind of pencil case a lot, that you can use it effectively as a pencil pot once it's open. And I hope you can kind of get the idea of how that would work. You would pull it down a couple more inches, probably 1.5 inches, and then it's all quite firmly interfaced, so that's what holds it stable. But I was a bit annoyed with myself that I'd forgotten to do that, and now I'm a bit annoyed because it doesn't really work. So I'm going to try and fix that. I was quite pleased with this. The fat quarters came with some ribbon wrapped around holding them together, and I've used bits of that to make the tabs, which I think works quite well. It's lined. Yeah, you know, I did quite a good job on the sewing, and so I'm just really annoyed that I didn't get the measurements right and didn't sew the side seams correctly. So I'm going to see if I can fix that and then have that to use as well. So that is all I actually sewed. I did do have a little bit of haul. When I was going through my sewing patterns, that was in the first studio tour in Tidy Up, it was really noticeable that I didn't have many skirt patterns. And I sort of knew this. I've been making skirts without a pattern for the last few years, and it's sort of okay. But I was just like, actually, I would quite like a skirt pattern for the kind of skirt I basically wear. So I found this one. It's New Look 6106. This comes in sizes, well, US sizes 10 to 22. So that's probably, I don't know, 14 to 24, something like that in UK sizes. And I don't think I'm going to make the long version, but I might well make the sort of short version and the slightly knee length version. And if you can see, there's an option on this knee length version. I like the way those pockets sit, and I like the sort of idea of the button trim. And they've also suggested you could put like a ribbon trim on the waistband there. So it doesn't need a lot of fabric. For the smaller shorter skirt, if you've got 60 wide fabric, it's about 1 metre. So I mean, that's what I would normally buy for a skirt of that sort of, you know, slightly A-line knee length skirt. So I think it won't be that different from the way that I've been making skirts before, but I like the pockets. I think it'll be good to have a shape to work from. And I have bought some fabric to make a skirt. This will be a sort of autumn winter skirt, so I'm not planning to get started on it anytime soon. Look at that! Look at that! So that is denim. Beautiful dark indigo denim. It's a nice weight for a skirt. I think it would be really quite sturdy jeans, but for a skirt it'll be lovely. And then it's got these printed, I imagine they were printed with bleach. These huge circles that have, I mean, if you want to know what is a polka dot pattern, this is a polka dot pattern. Absolutely. They are proper circles. They're nice and big. They're in this regular pattern. I'm just going to hide behind it for a moment. That is a polka dot and a half. And I love it. And I just think that'll be such a fun knee-length winter denim skirt to wear. So I'm very pleased with that. So that is all the sewing haul that I have. I just want to report back on the fur fabric. So thank you to everyone who left comments. Somebody left a really helpful suggestion to see how they might react in the rain. So obviously this is not going to be a raincoat. It's not a waterproof coat. But I live in the UK and it rains. And I don't think you can ever guarantee, I mean, any time of year, but certainly not in the winter, that you'll go out and it won't rain. So I thought that was a really interesting thing. So I've taken the 3 samples that are in the running and I've run them all through under the tap about half an hour ago. And I thought I would just show you the results of that. So here we are. So I think it's quite interesting. This one here. This was the most expensive one. This had the really, really lovely, soft rabbit, beautiful feel to it. I don't think that stands up well under the rain. You see how it's all clogging together and it still feels really wet. You know, I rinsed them all, squeezed them out, and then if they've been sitting for half an hour, that still feels really quite wet. yeah, not so wet on the inside, but yeah, I think that would be quite unpleasant to be wearing. This one, I think this was slightly cheaper. I can't remember how much this one was. I don't love the colour on this one as much. I don't love the feel on it as much, but it has held up better under the wet than the first one. And then this, which was the cheapest of the three options, I think this is really interesting. It does feel still quite damp, but it hasn't made that much difference to the look of the fabric. And I feel like this just suggests to me that this would wear better. And, you know, with the best in the world, I'm not the person who looks after their clothes brilliantly. So I think given that this one is cheaper, and I do really like it, and it works really well under the rain, I just think even from the moment where it was literally under the tap and I was squeezing it out, it essentially came back to something very similar to its standard appearance very quickly. And it doesn't feel, it's damp, but it doesn't feel unpleasant in the way that the really posh rabbit fur does. So I think I've made my decision. That's was that number 1 or number 3 on last poll? I can't quite remember. I think it might have been number 1, which I think most people said 1 or 3, and I think that is the one I'm going to go for. So thank you to everyone who commented on that in person or in a comment on the video. I'm glad to know that you all agree with me. Good, so that is sewing. What else have I got? I have got some stitching. So I've got this that you've seen a myriad of times before. This was my Neela, and I thought I had finished all the cross stitch on it, not cross stitch, needlepoint on it, but actually I looked up how big real Neelas are, and it was about 1 inch too small all the way around. And then I thought, well, actually, on a lot of Neelas in church, you do get people signing it. Often they'll just put their initials. Quite often they'll put the date when it was made, and sometimes they'll put the occasion that it was made for, maybe the church's centenary or some special remembrance thing or whatever it is. So I thought, well, actually what I'll do is I'll add a border, which I did. That's just a sort of simple geometric border, and then on this side I'll stitch my name and the year, and on the other side I'll stitch Living in Love and Faith, which is the thing that the Church of England are doing that I am making this as a contribution towards. So I'm really pleased with that, and that now comes out almost exactly the right size for a standard Neela. So it is now ready to be sewn up into the cushion. The other thing I did was block it. When I was stitching it, I just stitched it in hand. I didn't use a frame. It's quite old canvas. Yeah, I hadn't really bothered about keeping it square, but it was very unsquare by the time it was very much, all the corners were at an angle. So all I did was dampen it, put it in the bath and put the shower on it. That's the easiest way I find. Press it out a bit. You don't want to kind of scrumple it up, but if you roll it up and then kind of press like that to get the sort of initial excess water out. And then I have a set of children's play mats. You know, the kind of thing that fit together in a grid. They quite often have letters on them or numbers or whatever. I have a set of those, and if you put those out, they are perfect for pinning something like this into shape. So then you pin it in the shape you want it. At that point, when it's damp, everything is quite malleable. You can kind of stretch it out or push it in or whatever. And then you pin it down in the shape you want. And by the time it's dry, it dries in the shape you've pinned it into. So I'm not going to say necessarily these are perfect right angles, but they're not far off. So that is now ready. And it also helps to kind of smooth out some of your stitching as well. You can do that sort of blocking with knitting and crochet, but it works really well on tapestry too. So that's that. And then finally in stitching, this is what I did today. So it is the 10th of July, it's a Saturday when I'm filming this, and I have been on a workshop today at Unit 12. Unit 12 is a gallery and workshop space just around the corner from me, in fact. I'll put a link to it. They have all sorts of lovely workshops there and exhibitions, and if you're passing by, it's always worth a look. I say it's always worth a look. They're not open every day. Check when it's open, but it's worth a look. So today I was on a workshop led by Anne Kelly. I'm going to show you actually because I bought her book. She has several books, but I bought one of her books when I was there. Textile Folk Art. And she does this kind of thing. Let me show you on the back. So it's like collage with fabric, and then she does this sort of stitching over, which kind of melds together all your collage bits so that it appears as if it's one fabric. It functions as a single fabric. And you can use this technique to make all sorts of things, all sorts of images and so on. So let me just show you. That's another example of her work with all of these birds in it and sort of birds behind windows there. But the workshop we were doing today was this sort of idea. So we were doing houses, and you can see she's used a patchwork background, and then she's layered different kinds of fabrics and shapes on the top, and then stitched them, I don't know if you can see that in the image, stitched them all down into a single piece. Yeah, and so then there were instructions for how to do it. So we did that today. We started with a sketch of a house. You know, we all had different houses, ones that were meaningful to us. We did some stamping on fabric just with acrylic paint and ordinary stamps. And then we cut out, we sketched our house on greaseproof paper. You could use tracing paper or whatever, so that you can then use that as a template for the bits that you cut out. And then we layered and layered and layered all kinds of fabrics on top and began to stitch. This is still very much a work in progress. It needs a lot more stitching and possibly some embellishment. But that is my house. And it's not the house I currently live in. It's the house I grew up in as a child. It's very near the house where I currently live. It's the house that, if you ask me, what does home look like? It looks like this. And for me, that's a really happy place. So I wanted to put lots of bright colours in. The actual house is black and white timbered. It's Victorian mock Tudor. It's not actual Tudor. But I didn't want to use black and white because, you know, it's me. So this has all got different kind of colours, pinks and purples. And then the beautiful green background. It has a circular driveway. So I thought, well, if I frame it in a circle and then have lots and lots of trees and plants and flowers and butterflies, and there's a little dragonfly there from something I embroidered years and years ago, a little bird on the ceiling, and so on. So it still needs a lot more stitching to get it to feel like it's a single piece, but I'm super pleased with the composition of that, and how it fits together. And it looks like the house and it feels like the house. The house as it looks right now is pretty grey and derelict. It's quite sad. But this is how it looks in my imagination, in my memory. So I really enjoyed that. That was Anne Kelly at Unit 12. She does workshops all over the place, and Unit 12 do all kinds of workshops. Yeah, it's a really lovely little space to go. At the moment, they're running workshops at about half capacity because of COVID, but normally they fit in about 12 people there. I had a birthday party there a few years ago, and that was really fun. It was, you know, they did one of the workshops, and I just invited my friends and family and stuff, and we did screen printing that day, I think, on fabric, which was really fun. So I'm looking forward to that. At some point, I think this will go on the wall, but it does need some work first. But I do have one more thing that I finished. I don't know if you remember, a little while ago, I talked to you about some of the tile work that we were doing in my art class. We were using air-dried clay, stamping into it, making all kinds of marks in it, making it into tiles, making a display. Anyway, we finished most of it a week ago, and then yesterday I had a chance just to varnish it and glue it down, and this is what I have made. So it was sort of inspired by samplers with these sort of little sections, and the Adam and Eve and the tree in the garden, and then I've got words. So it says, marry in faith, not in haste. And we've got Adam and Eve and then some little love hearts here. And I really like it. I really like it. I wasn't sure I was going to like it all that much. It wasn't one of my favourite projects while we were doing it. Looking at it now, I'm not sure that these pink things, I think probably I should have done a bit more colour mixing in those, but I don't care. I think it's fine. I think it's fine. I don't know quite where it's going to go, but it will go on the wall somewhere, at least temporarily. Let me just hold it so you can see. So all of these are done with different kind of poking tools and straws and a little mini biscuit cutter, and I can't even remember what I used. I think this was a sort of crinkly edge biscuit cutter that I used to make these shapes, and then I went in and put the grass around it. Letter stamps, obviously alphabet stamps to make the words. I had something here that had leaf shapes on it. I can't remember what it was. Maybe a stamp, maybe a rubber stamp, something like that. And then these were leaf shapes from, somebody had a cutter that you would use for icing, you know, posh icing on cakes, but actually that was perfect for making those leaf shapes. The end of a straw, I think, maybe, on those. I can't remember. But anyway, it's just stuck on a piece of MDF, painted with acrylic, and then varnished and glued down. So yeah, I won't be entering for the next series of the Great Pottery Throwdown, but I'm pleased with what I've done there. So I think that's everything that I have made and bought and worked on. It feels like not as much as usual, and I'm not really surprised it's not as much as usual. It's been the end of term for me the last couple of weeks, and I've been tired, so I've not been doing a whole lot after work in the evenings. I mean, you know, bits, but not as much as I normally might. Yeah, but that's all right. I think we still have plenty to make this a reasonable length video. Oh, there's one other thing I have done. I'll put a little bit of video footage of that at the end of the video, and you'll see that was a project for my art class, and it's not living in my house. It has gone to decorate the art studio there, but I will just show you those as we go. So just to let you know, this time next week I am going to be on holiday, but I have filmed the next part of the Great Studio Tour and Tidy Up. That will come out on Sunday the 18th, but then there won't be a video on Sunday 25th because I will have been on holiday. I will do one for the following weekend, and I'll try and again also film another studio tour and tidy up, so there's another one of those as well. But there are going to be some weeks over the summer where there won't be a video, and that's just to let you know, really. If there are things, I know I talked about doing transformation challenges from the Sewing Bee, and I will get to those. I don't know when I will get to those. Maybe in August I might try and get to one or two of those, and that would be fun to do. Somebody had asked some questions about how I got into art and craft and making things. I will talk about that. Well, it won't be in the one that comes out next week because I've already filmed that, but maybe I'll talk about that in the next studio tour video that I film, a little bit about how I got into doing all of this sort of stuff. But if there are any other questions that anyone has about things that I'm doing, things that I've tried in the past, things you wonder whether I know anything about, I mean, there's a fair chance if it's an art and craft question, I will have had a go at it at some point in the past, even if I'm not currently doing it at the moment. I very much like trying new things. That's what I love, is learning new things rather than getting good at old things. So workshops like the one I went on today is perfect for me. I just, you know, I love that. Let's spend a day doing something new. It's not that different from stuff I've done before, but it's a little bit different because it's her way of doing it. And I'll work on this piece, and I'm looking forward to finishing that. I've really enjoyed working on that. But then I'm not then going to do another half a dozen of those. I'll move on to the next thing. Anyway, thank you so much to those of you who have kept watching this far through. Thanks to those of you who have commented on previous videos or talked to me and let me know that you've been watching. I've really enjoyed hearing from you. Please do leave a comment if you've got any questions, things you'd like me to talk about in future videos, and do keep watching to the end to see what else I have been making for my art class this week. Hope you're all well. See you next time.